Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do. To educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr.Jade Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to today's show. I'm not sure what to call today's show, as it's kind of a combination of things, and it comes from a question, from not a repeated question. I don't get this question often, but it came from someone from a DM a while back asking about preparing for a marathon that they wanted to do and losing weight. And we're also going to talk a little bit about this idea of what happens with exercise in menopause as well. So why don't we call this Marathon Training in Menopause? I don't know what the eventual name of this podcast will be, but we're going to cover a little bit of both. Now, the issue here is this sort of old idea that cardio is the way to go for weight loss. I mean, if you think back, at least in my sort of history, I'm 46 now, so I'm middle-aged, and I remember back in the 80s, I was a child of the 80s, and so in the 80s, it was all about running. If you wanted to lose weight, all you need to do is run, right? It was all about carbs and cardio, really, were sort of the thing, and that, you know, sort of fat intake and weight training were the opposite of sort of what you wanted to do. You know, the idea back then was that weight training would make you bulky. Then things sort of swung around a little bit, and a lot of people got on the cardio-hating bandwagon, and me in my younger, more biased, more dogmatic years and more ignorant years, I was a little bit on that cardio-hate wagon as well, which was convenient since I hated doing cardio, so it was easy for me to hate on cardio. But as I became a little bit more evidence-based and started looking at the data and really pushing my bias aside, I kind of came back to the middle. Now, this question gets to this sort of idea that, listen, I want to perform. I want to do something performance-oriented, and I also want to lose weight. And the thought is, normally when people go on these sort of marathon running training programs, the idea is that they're automatically going to lose weight. And the truth of the matter is most don't. And some even gain weight. And for those of you who have had this experience, you're going to be like, that was me. And for those of you who have never heard that, you're going to be like, oh my God, what are you talking about? That can't be so. How does that work? And for those of you who work in sort of my field and understand the research, you're probably saying, yes, I understand some of the mechanisms. Well, I'm going to go through some of the mechanisms here today. And the reason I said we're going to focus on menopause a little bit is because the menopausal woman is the woman who falls into that age category where carbs and cardio were kind of the thing to do back when she was coming up. Back when she was a young woman, she probably got results from running a lot, and that was what she did to stay healthy, and that's sort of the way it worked. And then as you kind of, gain in maturity and the metabolism changes a little bit with perimenopause and menopause, that may not be the case. And, you know, obviously if you're a male listening to this or you're working with male clients, a lot of this podcast is going to be applicable to you. So I don't want you to shut this off just because you're hearing menopause. The only reason we're talking menopause is because I want to sort of start with this major menopausal study that illustrates what actually the science actually hints at in all populations, in particular women, but probably men too, as it pertains to traditional cardiovascular exercise. This would be aerobic exercise done for 30 to 60 minutes in the aerobic zone, right? So this aerobic zone type of cardio. Essentially what we're talking about is going out for a jog or jogging on the treadmill, which is very clearly what you're doing when you're going out to run one of these long marathons. You're just doing it for, 4 hours or more, right? And so we're going to cover this postmenopausal study first, right? So these are menopausal women in the postmenopausal period. So you're looking at women somewhere in the mid 50s, and on. And what they did was they took these women, and these were called the alpha and beta trials. This is where this data comes from if you're a research nerd. The alpha trial stands for Alberta Physical Activity and Breast Cancer Prevention. And the beta trial stands for Breast Cancer and Exercise Trial in Alberta. Researchers like to kind of do these, funny little acronyms sometimes. So the alpha and beta trial were on Canadian women who were postmenopausal. And essentially what they did in these trials is they had essentially 3 different volumes of traditional aerobic zone training. So in the alpha trial, they had 5 sessions, so 5 times per week. These women went out and jogged for 45 minutes. Now, in the beta trial, they had 2 groups. They had one group that went out and ran for 5 times per week for 30 minutes, and the other group went out and ran 5 times per week for 60 minutes. So when you put all this together, you have 3 groups of women. They're all training 5 times per week. One group is doing 30 minutes, one group is doing 45 minutes, and one group is doing 60 minutes. So the only difference between these women is that they're exercising longer. So one group, the 60-minute group, has a higher volume than the 45-minute group, has a higher volume of training and more calorie burn than the 30-minute group. Now, what's interesting about this is that the diet wasn't changed. And so the intervention here was to see what would happen with weight loss with these running cardio-based interventions. It's all aerobic training. What would happen? Now, assuming that the diet stays the same, so calories are not changed, which this trial did not look at. It basically told all the women to keep their diet exactly the same, and the only thing that was different here was this idea of, hey, we're going to do this aerobic training. And if you want to know the study that I'm looking at this data, if you want to read it yourself, it's called Dose Response Effects of Aerobic Exercise on Energy Compensation in Postmenopausal Women. Combined results from 2 randomized controlled trials. And this was published in August 2017 in the International Journal of Obesity, and it's volume 41, number 8, pages 1196 to 1202. So what did they find here? Well, one of the things, before I tell you the exact findings, I want to talk about a sort of other study that is somewhat related to this. One of the things that people believe when they're doing exercise is they believe that energy expenditure, the amount of energy you burn in a day through physical activity, they believe that that is linear or additive. So in other words, each of us have what we call the total daily energy expenditure, and that's made up of your resting energy expenditure, your REE, which is synonymous with basal metabolic rate. Then it's made up of, sort of activities of daily living, exercise, and food, right? The thermic effect of food. So basically what they're looking at here is the only thing they're changing is physical activity, exercise. And so if you're like most people, you probably believe if your resting energy expenditure, the amount you burn at rest every day is, let's say, 2,000 calories, and then you go out and burn 300 calories in exercise, then you probably believe that you're now at 1,700 calories, a very additive sort of situation, right? So this is how most people think. They think of the metabolism as a calculator. You burn off 300 calories through exercise, and you have a 2,000 calorie sort of resting rate, and now you burn a total of 2,300 calories. Or you could look at it another way, and you're basically saying, okay, I can make up another 300 calories. So I have, essentially only 1,700 is now sort of my starting rate, and I can eat up to 300 calories more if I want. But to make this super simple, because I know all this is getting a little bit confusing, I'll just say this. These women who are doing this study go out and run. And if we look at it the traditional way, if they have a resting energy expenditure, a basal metabolic rate of 2,000 calories, and they burn 300 calories in exercise, then we're thinking, hey, that's 2,300 calories they burn through the day, 2,000 through resting energy expenditure, 300 through physical activity. And that is an additive approach to metabolism. The problem is that the metabolism does not work that way for most women and most people. In fact, the metabolism works in a constrained way. In other words, if you have a resting metabolism of 2,000 calories and you go burn 300 calories, the next time you go out and do that exercise, what the body does, or even that day, the body starts to constrain all other aspects of the metabolism. So for example, it will fidget less. It will move less in your sleep. It will try to recoup some of the calories you burn just through being less motivated and moving less. Like literally, one of the major 15% of calorie burn comes from non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which basically means just walking around, fidgeting, moving, biting your nails, tapping your feet, walking from point A to point B, doing the laundry, washing the dishes, getting up, shifting your weight, standing instead of sitting, all this stuff. Well, when you go out and do exercise, what happens is it's not additive, it's actually constrained. The metabolism starts to say, okay, we burned 300 calories, let's move less, let's be less motivated, let's fidget less, let's toss and turn less in our sleep. And what happens is, in a very silent, subconscious way, it starts to recoup a lot of this lost activity through exercise. You might say, well, why is this important? It's important because if this is going on in these women who are doing this sort of, running program, what's happening is the amount of energy that they would predict to be losing based on calorie burn for activity is not going to reach those predictions. So they're going to lose less weight than they thought. Okay, so that's one thing that's going on here. The other thing that happens when you go and do activity like this is, and by the way, that constrained effect on metabolism is very individual. Some people will have more constraining of metabolism, some will have less, right? Now, the other thing that happens is, as a result of doing activity, you actually can get hungry, can't you? Now, this is, again, as individuals. Some people who go out and do cardiovascular exercise don't get hungry at all. In fact, they'll have a little bit of suppressed appetite. So maybe as a result of burning the 300 calories, they also eat less as well. But most people, 75% of people, at least in this study on females, what actually overcompensate. So if they go out and burn 300 calories in cardio, they actually will end up consuming more calories than they would have otherwise. And some of those women, right, let's imagine now you have a subset of individual women who have very strong constraining effects. So the metabolism starts burning less, in terms of activity, both while you're doing the exercise and through these activities of daily living as you repeat this again and again. And they have this sort of huge compensation in hunger, so much so that they overcompensate. Can you see how this might, as a result of doing all this cardio, through this constrained energy effect and this increased effect on hunger, cause actual weight gain as a result of doing cardio? So I'll say that again. Can you see how if someone does cardio and they get this constrained effect on metabolism, where the amount of calories they burn during exercise becomes less and less and less, and the amount they burn at rest also becomes less as a way of compensating for the activity itself, plus they end up getting hungry and overeating as a result of the exercise, can you see how they can actually put themselves in calorie excess and gain fat? And that's exactly what happened to 26.6% of these postmenopausal women. Basically 25%, a full quarter of these women in the alpha and beta trials actually ended up gaining weight as a result of being put on a cardiovascular weight loss program using nothing but exercise to try to force weight loss. What actually happened was they actually inadvertently gained weight. 25% of these women. So you might say, well, what happened to the other 75% then, Jade? Well, 25% of those women actually end up losing weight, right? So you had 25% lose weight and 25% gain weight. And the other 50% of these women had no change in weight. So a full 75% of these women who did these cardiovascular exercise programs in this alpha and beta trial, which included about 700 women in these trials over the course of a year, they basically saw either no change in their weight or a gain in weight. Now imagine that. Imagine you start, a marathon running program, or you have a trainer or someone who puts you on an exercise program, or you're trying to think back to when you were in your 30s and what you did to be in such great shape, and you were running a lot, and you start picking up your running. You start running 5 times per week for 30, 45, or 60 minutes each time, expecting to get results, and instead you actually gain weight or see nothing. And only 25% of individuals see a response. And it would be even more infuriating, right, if your girlfriend is one of the ones who gets a nice weight loss effect from running, and you're one of the ones who gets a weight gain effect from running. Now, rest assured, this almost certainly happens in men too, and most certainly happens in younger women as well as more mature women. And so the point here is to answer the first question of this podcast: is cardio a good way to achieve weight loss? Well, no, unless you're in the 25% of individuals who respond favorably to it. And actually, it is the exact wrong thing to do if you are in the 25% who gain weight from it. Now, we have to be careful here and make sure you catch me and catch yourself whenever you hear statements like this, because what you should be saying at this point is say, well, Jade, this was just one study, and we need to see this sort of repeated again. However, we have seen over and over and over again that cardiovascular exercise, or exercise in general, as a strategy for weight loss does not work well at all. In fact, diet is what has to be done if you want weight loss. Now, we also have to have this conversation about weight loss versus fat loss. Now, when you're doing lots of cardiovascular exercise, you're going to lose fat, yes. You may actually lose some muscle as well. Now, here's a point to remember. If you're dieting just by diet alone and you're not moving at all, you're going to lose up to, some studies have shown, 20% of lean body mass. Now, that could be water, muscle, organ tissue, etc. Lean body mass, right? That's a lot, though, and that could be a significant amount of muscle. And if you lose muscle when you lose weight, you're losing some metabolic potential. In other words, your basal metabolic rate and resting energy expenditure goes down, to a degree as a result of that, doesn't it? And so we want to be, sort of careful here when we start, sort of looking at trying to compensate this way. Now, if we lose 20% with dieting alone, if we add cardiovascular exercise to the diet, the movement of the muscle does cause the woman or the man to hang on to more muscle. So they'll lose less of that 20%. However, if we add weight training, not only can we not lose muscle, but we may even be able to gain muscle. And so when we start making the distinction between weight loss and fat loss, we go, not only is cardio perhaps not the best way to lose weight for 75% of people, at least 75% of the postmenopausal women in this study, but it may also not actually be best for anyone for fat loss, because you can lose up to 20% if you're just doing diet in lean tissue, and perhaps less of that if you were running. And so we have this conundrum here. And so that brings us to this idea then of, Jade, okay, well, should I stop doing all my cardio? And what if I want to do one of these running programs? I'm a runner. I love doing running. And it also, first, maybe we should answer the question about, what about runners who are really lean? What about these runners who you see who are runners their whole lives and just have these beautiful lean physiques, men and women, right? These lean physiques. One of the things you have to understand, and this is another one of these just aha moments that when I tell you, you'll go, oh, that's of course true. One of the things you have to understand is that we're all individuals and we all have genetic propensities and certain, sort of physiological talents, so to speak, things that we're good at. Some of us have lots of type 1 muscle fibers, sort of more genetically, which make us better runners. Some of us, like me, have more type 2 explosive sort of muscle fibers, and we're built more for strength and sprinting and football and things like that, where others of us are more genetically wiry. What we tend to think wrongly is we tend to think if you go out and run a lot, you're going to look like elite runners. But the truth of the matter is usually that's not the case at all. Normally, elite runners become elite runners because when they're young and they are trying out sports and things like that, they were naturally suited to running. So when you did the, sort of the fitness test in elementary schools and grade schools and things like that, these people would have excelled. And as a result of excelling, they would say, oh, I'm good at this. And it would have this feed forward sort of effect of them wanting to do more and more and more. And so in a sense, the sport chooses the person rather than the person choosing the sport. In a sense, the activity, right, is not the thing that shapes the person, but the person is already shaped and then chooses the activity. In other words, take someone like a Lance Armstrong who rides a bike, right? He's out of vogue now because, of the cheating thing, but we'll use Lance Armstrong. For those who don't know Lance Armstrong, I'd be surprised if you don't, but, one of the most prolific and successful, long-distance bikers in the history of the sport. A lot of people thought he looked the way he looked. He was lean because he rode a bike. But the truth of the matter is he probably more likely rode a bike because he looked the way he looked, right? And so that's important. To give you a tangible example of this, I have always been, when I went out for my first sport, it was soccer. I was always a muscular kid. And I remember my dad asking me after the soccer season, so do you want to go out next year? And I said, no. And he goes, why not? I said, I hate all the running. I was terrible at it. So I was in football the next year and just did great because football was these very short, powerful bursts of activity. And I loved that sport because it suited me. So I found football, or you could say football found me. I was shaped a certain way, designed a certain way, had certain physiological talents that I could exploit in football. So I learned to love it. So this is one thing you have to understand. Certainly there are very lean, fit runners out there. They are either people who started running and were one of these 25% who lose weight with it and are able to hold on to their muscle, or more likely they were people who are already had a runner genetics or a runner geared physiology and found running, excelled at it, and kept doing it because they enjoyed excelling and being competent at it. So that's an important thing to sort of understand here. Now, the next question is, well, Jade, should we not do cardio at all then? And if we're after, let's say, fat loss and body shape? And no, not at all. And actually, the research says pretty conclusively here that if you take weight training, which is the best thing to do to shape the body, and add cardio to it, the two together act synergistically for fat loss. The cardio helps the weight training be a better fat burner, and the weight training helps the cardio be a better muscle maintainer, or perhaps even a muscle builder. They also have different effects on appetite. Weight training because there's going to be some individual differences here, may not have the same appetite increasing effects. And also, because some of the constrained issues around metabolism when you exercise have to do with sort of muscle kinetics and thyroid hormone and other things like that, some of these muscle myokines that are released when we move our muscle may offset that a little bit. And so this is why weight training is so important. So if we're going to do one of these marathon running programs, some of the things we've already learned so far is that, well, if you're going to lose weight, if you really want to lose weight, diet comes first. That's most important. Most people, 75%, are not going to lose weight by doing exercise alone. And 25%, according to the study I'm sharing with you, may actually gain weight as a result of doing that. So exercise comes first. Diet comes first. You need to get that correct. And then we need to realize that cardiovascular exercise done all by itself with nothing but exercise might not be best for fat loss. And so then we want to add weight training on to that. But this brings up a conundrum, especially if we're talking about, okay, now we have performance goals, right? We want to run and get faster and run a marathon and be able to complete it. And in order to do that, if you look at these training programs, I got to run Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and Saturday, and maybe I'll take Sunday off, but I got to run. How do I fit in weight training and, not overdo the cardio, and also manage my diet with this? And so this is sort of the approach. Now, I'm going to be completely honest here. I have never run a marathon, nor do I have any plans to run a marathon. I don't ever want to run a marathon. However, ironically, when I was coming up as a young, sort of strength and conditioning specialist, I worked with a lot of marathon runners and triathletes. And actually, I got such good results. I worked with some very, very prominent triathletes along the way. And I used a method that I'm going to share with you today to both help them get faster and keep them stronger, and also help them sort of lose weight and sort of deal with body composition issues as well. Now, before I get into that, I got to kind of teach you three main things about what you want to do if you want to increase your cardiovascular performance. If you want to get better at running, there is essentially three parameters we need to look at. We need to look at aerobic capacity. This would be VO2 max, and this has to do with getting oxygen into the body, into the lung, exchanging oxygen at the level of the lung and the blood vessel, delivering that oxygen to the tissues, unloading it, picking up CO2, having it all come back around and blow out CO2. So this has a lot to do with efficiency of breathing, efficiency of moving, efficiency of blood flow, right? So VO2 max, aerobic capacity, is one of the things you need to increase to get good at running. You also want to increase anaerobic capacity. So this would be things like, what we would call lactate threshold. What a lot of people don't realize about this is that you essentially have two gears in the body. One is sort of this lower gear, first gear, aerobic activity. Now, once you get above a certain intensity threshold, the body cannot continue to deliver oxygen and burn fuel fast enough to keep up with demand. And that's when you start going anaerobic. Anaerobic is like shifting into fourth gear in a sense. Now, just like you have to go from first gear to second gear to third gear to finally get to fourth gear, you have to essentially max out first gear before you can get to fourth gear. It's sort of the same thing. You have to max out your aerobic sort of mechanics to go anaerobic. And so when you're anaerobic, you're also aerobic. So in a sense, if we can use anaerobic training, not only are we building VO2 max, but we're also improving lactate threshold. And so in other words, higher intensity training, like high intensity interval training, is one of the things that you can use to not only increase VO2 max, but also to increase lactate threshold. Now, if you're wondering what lactate threshold is, you can think about when you're running and your legs start to burn and this lactate builds up. Now, lactate doesn't cause the burn, by the way. The burn is caused by proton buildup. Actually, lactate buffers against those protons. It grabs those protons and turns it into lactic acid so that you can go longer, right? And so lactate threshold is basically how much of this lactate can actually buffer against these changes in pH going on in the muscle so you can go longer. And you train that by sort of going harder. So you need aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacity, and you also need exercise economy. And so usually if you're running, right, you get good at that movement pattern. So for example, I'm not a runner. So if I went out and ran today and you watched me and you came driving by in a car and I was running down the sidewalk, you'd be like, oh my God, that looks painful even watching that guy run, because I don't have the exercise economy. I'm very inefficient. I'm a big burly looking dude with lots of muscle on me. I'm not going to last long because I'm so inefficient. I also don't have the aerobic capacity of a trained runner. And I do have some of the anaerobic capacity, but you need both, right? You sort of need both. So in a sense, what most runners will do and what they are told to get better at running is their focus is on aerobic capacity. Just go out and run for longer and longer periods of time. First do first do 5 minutes, then 10, then 20, then an hour, then 90, and then just keep running longer and longer. And at some point, you reach the law of diminishing returns in a sense. And so the idea here is in this training protocol that I'm going to give you, I'm going to teach you how to be more efficient in your running programs to perform better, but also it also has rollover effects because it's also a better way to achieve the weight loss that you want with running. And basically it achieves this through improving aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacity, and exercise economy. So in a sense, what you're essentially doing is you're limiting your runs to only 3 runs per week as you're training for this marathon program. 1 run is going to be a short, intense, high-intensity interval run lasting about 20 minutes, right? So this is where you're going to go super hard for a minute and then stop and walk or jog really slow for a minute, and then repeat that for 10 rounds for 20 minutes, and then you're done. This is going to train the anaerobic state. It's going to allow you to push harder than you ever would in a slow jogging race so that the anaerobic capacity is built up. It's also the fastest way to build up VO2 max aerobic capacity because like we said, if you're anaerobic, you're already maxed out aerobically. Now, the long runs are also done 1 time per week. So you're doing this short, intense, anaerobic based sort of run, and then you're doing this sort of longer aerobic sort of training sort of run, and then there's 1 run in the middle that we call a tempo run, which is a run that is run at race pace, and this is sort of in between the two. So you might think like, okay, if I'm doing an hour-long run and I'm slowly going to ramp that run up on my long run up on the weekend, let's say. So let's say on Mondays you do this high-intensity interval training run. And on Wednesdays you do this tempo run, which is a run that is run faster than race pace. So it's not as hard as the high-intensity interval run where you push 1 minute, rest 1 minute, but it's much faster than you would run the actual race. Much faster, right? And that is also, as a result of that, much shorter. So let's say if the sort of anaerobic sort of high-intensity interval training run is 20 minutes, then you make this tempo run 40 minutes. And then you say your longer run is about 60 minutes, let's say. And that long run is run just like you would run the race, sort of this slow, controlled sort of thing. So it's super hard and fast on Monday, anaerobic, high-intensity interval. Fast race pace tempo run, faster than race pace Wednesday, and then race pace long run. And then every week you can increase the timing of the run or the distance of the run, right? So maybe you go 60 minutes and then you go 70 minutes, then 80 minutes, then 90 minutes, or maybe you instead go, I'm going to run 10 miles today, 12 miles today until you get up to the marathon running. And so what happens is that high-intensity interval run builds anaerobic capacity. That tempo run builds anaerobic and aerobic capacity, and the leaning more sort of aerobic. And the long-distance run is training mostly aerobic and exercise economy. And then what you can do on the off days, Tuesday and Thursday, you don't want to do too much of this, but you can do an upper body weight training workout on Tuesday and a lower body weight training workout on Thursday. You probably want to do the lower body training earlier in the week if you're going to run a marathon, right? If you're going to run a marathon or run a long run on Saturday. And then you take Sunday off. So it's Monday high-intensity interval training working on anaerobic capacity. And then Tuesday, a lower body weight training program that's helping exercise economy. A stronger runner is a faster runner, all else being equal. And then Wednesday, you're doing a tempo run, which is faster than race pace, and that's building anaerobic and aerobic capacity. And then on Thursday, you're doing an upper body weight training workout that's working on exercise economy again, making you stronger. And then on sort of Friday or Saturday, Friday usually would be a day off before your long run. On Saturday, you're doing sort of this longer run, and then on Sunday, you take a day off. So Monday, intense intervals. Tuesday, weight training. Wednesday, tempo run. Thursday, weight training. Friday off. Saturday, long run. Sunday off. This is the way that I have built these protocols in the past, and this works very, very well and saves you time and keeps you fresh and keeps you from getting injured. It also controls some of the appetite issues that happen, as well as this constrained metabolism that happens, and keeps you in the fat loss zone instead of in the weight loss zone. Now, of course, if you're really trying to lose weight here and you want to perform, the next question is, what should I be eating here, Jade? And typically what you want to be doing is you want to set your macros at 40% carbohydrates, 30% protein, and 30% fat. And you can essentially set your macros up that way. Typically, what I like to do with individuals who are training in this way is let them eat to hunger, right? Set your macros 40, 30, 30, and then let yourself eat to hunger. If you want a target calorie to shoot for, if you're someone who's really after weight loss, shoot for 15 times your body weight in pounds. If you're someone who's a little bit more of, sort of wanting to perform, or you're having lots of hunger, you could go as high as 20%. And then you're going to look, am I performing the way I want? And am I slowly losing weight? And so this is the way that you would approach this. So real quick, I'm going to end here, but I want to sum up really quickly today's topic. So one of the things we have is a question about, well, does cardio help us lose weight? What you've learned through the study and some of the science I shared with you is that for 75% of people, the answer is no. In fact, for 25%, it may actually make you gain weight if you're not controlling your diet. And yes, for another 25%, it can help you lose weight. But for most people, it does not. So the first lesson there is you must control diet. But we also have to understand that we want to control this constrained metabolism effect and this overeating effect that cardio can elicit. So what can we do there? Well, we can institute shorter, more intense workouts because they don't have the same effect on hunger or the same constraining effect, perhaps. There's some indication that that's the case. We can add in weight training to hold on to the muscle to, again, undo some of this constraining effect and not have, the appetite sort of stimulating effects to the same degree. We also can change our running up a bit to make sure we're capturing and improving not just aerobic capacity, but anaerobic capacity and exercise economy all at the same time. And this is a better way to multitask for marathon training and running, or triathlons, or adventure races, or any of this kind of stuff, right? Because ultimately we want to look good, feel good, perform better. This is a better way to do it than the typical way. So I know this is a little complicated with the science. Hopefully you understood it. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And hopefully you now have a really good protocol for you runners out there to turn it to your advantage. Thanks so much for being on the podcast today, and I will see you at the next show.